Well, hey, Bob, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate having you.
My pleasure, Tanner. It's great to be here today.
So, for the folks who don't know, will you just give a little background of who you are? Obviously, today's conversation is about data centers, but you've got a history of working in energy and a couple other places. If you tell us about it, that'd be great.
Sure, you bet, Tanner. So presently, I'm the Lance Energy Chair at Montana Tech, and my job is to strengthen partnerships with industry, trade organizations, state and federal agencies, and national labs. And also, I'm an educator. I teach some engineering courses, but I also do a lot of public outreach, and it's really to, again, strengthen partnerships. And my background is I'm a Montana native, got a couple degrees from Montana Tech. Years ago, I spent most of my career in electric power, and so about 40 years in electric power, and designing protection and control systems. But then I got into designing industrial power control systems in like refineries and quite a bit in data centers. So I spent a fair amount of time designing the power in data centers, and then after I retired, that's when I joined Montana Tech. And so I've got roots in electric power and some exposure in data centers. And so it was kind of a natural progression. So when we started talking data centers in Montana, I thought, well, maybe I can help out in the in the dialogue and the conversation about what is and isn't correct about data centers.
Yeah, the funny thing there that you kind of bring up is you worked in data centers previously, and there is sometimes I run across folks that think that like data centers are a thing that were like created like 3 years ago, and data centers have been around for a long time.
Oh, to be sure. Yep.
Yeah.
They certainly have for decades.
Okay, so probably since honestly the onset of the internet age, where we're storing things on devices. But that kind of brings me to my first question for you is what exactly are data centers? Maybe some background on how they work.
Okay.
A lot of folks have never seen one, or they're just really curious about them. And
Sure.
curiosity is an important thing.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Tanner. So a data center is usually a large facility that's got racks of computers, and the computers are doing all kinds of calculations, cloud calculations. So, this webinar, I'll guarantee you, is going through a data center. You do your online banking, that's going through a data center. Download a Netflix movie, it's going to go through a data center. Just about everything you do, healthcare, goes through data centers. So physically, what are they? Racks and racks of computers, and computers, as you know, they get hot. You put your hand on your computer, it's getting hot. Well, imagine hundreds or thousands of those in close proximity, and these are not your small laptops. These are large industrial scale computers. They get hot, and so you need to cool them off so that they can continue to run. So the data center is basically got the electric power to keep the computers running. Then they get hot, so now they've got cooling systems to pull all the heat out. And these are mission critical systems, and they can never go down. So what you're going to see in these data centers is multiple electric utility feeds. So if one goes down, the other can start up. You're going to see some uninterruptible power supplies, battery banks, if you will, that should you lose the utility feed, that data center can run for a couple seconds on batteries until we switch over to on-site generation. So almost all data centers have on-site generation. So when the power utility goes out, they can keep on running. And so you go into them, and so they're spotlessly clean. They need to be very hygienic. And then the data centers, there's anywhere from individually owned, some say from one high-tech company might own their own. What's more common is what we call co-location data centers, where a data center company will build the building, do the electricity, and the air conditioning, security, fiber optic communications, and then other companies come in and lease space. That's real common. It's called a co-location data center, or you'll see what we call large hyperscale data centers now, which are usually the big high-tech companies coming in and building very large data centers to do the machine learning for AI. So all kinds of different flavors. And so I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's generally what they do and and what they are, what parts and pieces go into them.
Well, and I think that's an important point too, is that, you know, not all data centers are the same. And as someone who's
Correct.
worked in policy for years now, you know, someone that's doing like Bitcoin mining, that is a
Mhm.
very different beast than, you know, machine learning for AI, or for storing
Correct.
bank accounts or something like that. And what I like to remind folks is it's really easy for us to go, oh, this is data center. We could just shut them all down today and we'd be better off. But the reality is that I've got my family photo album
Yeah.
saved and backed
Mhm.
up there between all of my family. I've got my bank account. I've got my medical records all saved, so that if my house did catch on fire and I had a flood or something like that, I have them to my local device here too, but I have them backed up somewhere. And so these aren't
Correct.
just, you know, frivolous things. They're very much a major part of modern infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, life wouldn't be the same without them. And now, as we're progressing into artificial intelligence, which is really and now becomes a matter of national security because of the artificial intelligence is revolutionizing a lot of, especially white collar work, and bringing in huge productivity advances. And one question I get asked a lot is, "Hey, am I going to lose my job to AI?" And the answer is no, but you may lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI.
Yeah.
And this is, just the productivity increase is astounding. And that's why we're seeing that big acceleration. And it can be used in all kinds of things. Like here at Montana Tech, you can use it for helping to locate minerals, or characterizing oil and gas, or figuring out the environmental issues. But you can also use it for national defense. And so our government and the other governments around the world are recognize this is a matter of strategic national interest. And so it's not just nice to have. It's really, we need to stay on top of this for our national security.
Yeah, I think there's a really good point there. There's one angle that we've done some reports on, and it's not really talked about that much. It is a little bit starting to, but it's like you said, it's the idea of labor productivity. I don't think, you know, from the research that's being done, and where we're at with some of these AI models, they're not really going to replace jobs, but they can kind of augment work a little bit. And
Mhm.
Montana has, I think, if I remember right, we're 45th in the nation for labor productivity. We're at the very, very bottom. And a lot of
Okay.
that has to do with the types of industries that we have
Mhm.
here. But funny enough, those are the same industries that are seeing major benefits from AI. And so if we could, you know, increase labor productivity, which is basically how much work does it take to get one thing done? If we
Correct.
can reduce
Mhm.
the amount of work to get that one thing done, it's actually, you know, we're talking about better economic growth. We're talking about higher wages. You know, and anyone who's used AI can see it firsthand of
Yeah.
like, oh, I could use this for a lot of
Yeah.
things.
I use it. I use it daily, Tanner, and I'm not a uh, power user by any means, but I have a technical background. I have to do a lot of writing, and writing's not my forte. And so I used to spend a couple hours a day trying to get my message down, to where my eighth grade English teacher would give me at least a B plus. Well, now I put a rough draft into AI, and in 5 seconds it comes back. Spelling's perfect, grammar's perfect, and it saves me an hour or two a day. Just in my profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, so this kind of brings us, you know, into I think one of the reasons why the data center debate, if you will, is so big today, and that is AI. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the quote unquote controversy is going on? We have public hearings going on around the state, some in favor, some against. Give us a 10,000-foot view of why this is happening now.
Why the AI, or why data centers?
Why data centers?
Well, data centers, I think part of it's just the general expansion of the computations needed. So just the amount of people that are on the internet, banking, healthcare, all that, standard stuff is growing at leaps and bounds. But now you layer on top of that the AI, which is another significant boost. And so both applications are running in parallel, and growing significantly. And there was a very interesting study done by Mark Mills' outfit, National Institute of, if I can get that, um, the National Energy Institute. I'm sorry, I can't remember Mark Mills'
Oh, no
outfit.
sweat.
Anyway, they did a study on it, And the question was, is AI a bubble or a trend? And
Mm,
his assessment, National Center for Energy Analytics, sorry, his conclusion was that it's a trend, not a bubble. And what he does is he compares the growth of AI and data centers to which is about now, 1 trillion going to $2 trillion, which is about 5% of our GDP, which is a big number. But it compares to the build out of the interstate highway system,
mm.
or also to the build out of the chemical industry in the late 1800s. And he compares it closely to the chemical industry build out. And why is that? Is, well, it's a private money, not federal, and it also is a big productivity boost. So back when the chemical industry was booming, it made big, improvements in materials and medicines and things like that. So our productivity increased. Well, today you look at AI, and the projection is that it will be able to take our GDP growth from a normal, say, 1% per year to maybe 3 or 4%. Well, that's the economic engine that's going to pay for that $2 trillion a year investment. So he maintains that there's some legs under this, that it's paying for itself as we go. So kind of interesting analysis.
Yeah, and I think with every technological trend that's happened, like there is some feeling of bubbles,
Hmm.
where it's like
Yep.
I don't think that the promise of AI is that it can create a meme of my dog talking to me and dancing. I think
Correct.
cool, that's fun, but
Hmm.
where its promise is, if I have a large piece of data and I need to really see some analysis on what's the trend, what's
Yeah.
happening, whether it's for mining or if it's a good example that I've seen some really promising work on is for logging, actually. If
Okay.
you can increase, have it scan a log, and in the log, you can see, oh, if we cut it in this specific different way than the other
Yeah.
logs, just because the shape, we could actually get an extra board out of it in this kind of unique way. You're talking about increasing profitability like 1 to 5%. And that goes a long way for a company that's struggling.
Yeah, well, and my background is I did many years of writing software or firmware, and it's very complex. You end up with millions of lines of source code that go into a product, and now you have a bug. It's like, where's the bug? Well, turns out now you can turn that over to AI, and it can find these problems in short order. In fact, you probably heard in the news lately where some AI tools have discovered a bunch of latent um, uh, bugs in software that make it security risks. And so it's a very powerful tool, and it takes a lot of the monotony away. And what it does is it lifts the level of work that we can do. Right, it's no longer drudgery to go in and fix the grammar or find that bug. You can do what use your god-given skills to do what where you really excel.
Yeah, I can speak to that from a personal perspective
Mhm.
as well too. Using AI on my day-to-day work means I'm actually spending less time on emails and more time talking to people.
Correct.
And that's what I'm good at. That's what I want to be doing. I
Mhm.
don't want to be slaving away looking at all of my emails all day. So there's some major benefits there. But Bob, tell me a little bit, why do you care specifically? You've worked on this for a while. I think you've done
Yeah.
some speeches about this, but why do you care about data centers?
Well, couple reasons. Well, for what got me interested in it was, I had done some work, but then when I heard data centers were considering coming to Montana, and there was a lot of concern over, wow, it's going to use all of our water and our power. And so I thought, boy, that is concerning. And so because I'm a Montana native, I live here in Montana, and I want to protect our environment. So I started to do some homework on it, because I wanted to understand, hey, can we afford to have these things come to town? And then, what are the pros and the cons? So that's kind of what got me engaged. And I know there's a lot of people that have some legitimate concerns. And so that's why I personally got involved, is that I want to understand for myself. And then if I can, help out the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very true. I think that there is good justified reasons to be concerned. And
Mhm.
whenever someone goes, "Well, I don't know about this," I go, "Yeah, I mean that's really fair. Like you should think critically about our water resources in Montana. We're largely a dry state. We need it for agriculture. We have a population that's growing. Montana or Bozeman, where I
Mhm.
live, is already wondering about what we're going to do in the next 30 years for our water. So they're really
Mhm.
good questions. I think where they break down is there's definitely been some narrative pushing from groups that are outright opposing that. And I think that there's
Right.
been a lot of kind of misinformation. I'm curious, can you unpack a little bit about some of what you're seeing conversationally that are misnomers around the electricity side of data centers? Maybe you start out with how much do they use, and then we
Yeah.
can get into that.
Sure. That's great. So yeah, and you're right. There are concerns and um, on both the power and the water. We'll start with power first, but the the data centers do use a lot of power. There's no doubt about that. And so then the question is, well, how much can we afford to invest or give to data centers, and what's that going to do to our electricity rates?
Mhm.
And so that's the great question. And so data centers are projected to grow from a few percent, couple percent of our electric load to maybe high single digits nationally, which is a lot of energy. And in Montana, we've got a 3 or 4 data centers proposed that could raise the total power consumption in the state by as much as 30%. So that's pretty significant. And so the data centers, for example, there's a couple proposed in Montana that start out in the 50-ish megawatts and could go up to 1,000. Right now, I think the largest data center in Montana is about 65 megawatts. And so, with several of them, if they all build out in the next 10 years or so, that could add another, 1,400 megawatts. So it's substantial. And then the question is, well, where do we get the energy? And so I've looked into that. There's a data center proposed here in Butte of 50 megawatts going to say 200 or 250. Well, it turns out that Northwestern Energy just acquired 370 megawatts of energy from Colstrip. So that energy could go to funding that data center. And there's actually another data center in Butte that wants to expand. And so that would be enough energy there. So that's one model. The other model, there's a data center proposed in the Broadview area, and their model is different. They're planning on building their own on-site generation and then selling that out to the grid, and then buying back the energy from the grid. So what that does is they're able to come in and build. They're talking about upwards to 3,000 megawatts. That would about almost double the amount of electricity generation in the state. 3,000 megawatts of wind, solar, and batteries. So it's zero carbon, which is pretty cool for a lot of good reasons. And then they'd stand that up and then sell it out onto the market, and then buy back about 1,000 megawatts of firm power. So the thing that's cool about this is they're willing to make the investment. They can actually do the investment quicker than going through the utility has to go through a rigorous Public Service Commission process. They can bring it on quicker. They've also got the capital, and so the benefits here is you get outside capital to come in and invest in our infrastructure, which actually drives down the price of electricity for residential customers. And in fact, there's a couple studies that show that's in fact what happens when data centers come to town. When it's properly managed, they can invest in infrastructure and help spread those costs out. And so that's why I'm kind of excited about the data centers. Is they use a lot of energy, but they can certainly help us invest in our infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sharing the cost there, and I think when people hear that, they go,
Mhm.
"Oh, we got to share costs with data center." I say they're bringing in a lot of private capital for a grid that desperately needs upgrades,
Well, mhm. Yeah,
and
if you look at Montana, the last major build out we did in electric infrastructure was in the 70s and 80s when we built Colstrip, 4 units there, and we built the 500 kV line that connects Colstrip out to Seattle, and that was done largely with out of state investment. And now all those entities are leaving town, and we're faced with aging infrastructure. And so that's why I like to attract data centers, mining companies, material processing to the state, is they'll be that capital that can help invest. And so if you just look at the numbers of, say, all of the electric utility companies in the country, their market capitalization is about $1 trillion, so pretty big. But the investment that we're going to need for replacing Colstrip and upgrading our transmission network, a coal strip replacement by itself is $5 to $10 billion. We're looking at a couple billion or more for transmission. And so, and you got a market cap of a relatively small utility here with a small customer base. Where do you bring the capital? Well, the high tech companies in the country, their market cap is 20 trillion. So that's where the money is. And so you look at and you're seeing that the data centers that are interested to come to town, they're willing to invest in power systems.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point with Colstrip too. What I think folks should remember is that it's really easy for us to be like, oh, things are the way they are now. They've always been that way and they'll always be that way in the future. But we do know, even though Colstrip's going to stay open a little bit longer, it will eventually go away. It does have a close down date. And what do we do? And when that happens, how do we pay for it? Because we previously paid for it, like you mentioned, from all these companies coming in. And I think that this brings up what I would call maybe a fixed pie fallacy on energy use, that if someone's using more power, that means I get less. Correct. And what we need to have is a more realistic and historically accurate version, which is if we have people willing to spend a ton of money to generate more, we as the general consumer, I'm not using a bunch of megawatts, but I'm going to benefit from lower rates. And is that the trends that we've generally seen?
That's exactly what's happening. So if you move more megawatt hours, you sell more megawatt hours, you can sell them at a lower per unit cost. So the cost per megawatt hour goes down. And that's exactly what we're seeing across the country. Those regions in the country that expand their power systems, their rates go down. And areas where they're stagnant, the rates go up. And so, we're seeing that exact evidence come through. So it's kind of, in this case, the best defense is a good offense, is really to go after the growth. And so, and there's other great reasons to do it. The data centers bring, good tax revenue. I was in a meeting earlier today with a lot of the mining executives in the state, and they want to expand their operations. And that's going to take a lot of energy as well. And they're bring thousands of jobs, and so there's a lot of good reasons to invest in our energy infrastructure. It's going to help other industries as well.
I think that one of the things that we've heard, and maybe you'll have a good answer for this, power rates are going up, and it's because of data centers.
Okay.
How do you think about that as someone who's just like really in the weeds in this topic?
Okay, well, first of all, I feel your pain. Everybody's rates are going up, and the rates in Montana have gone up significantly in the last 5 or 10 years. In fact, they've gone up everywhere in the United States significantly. But if you look at in Montana, we haven't brought any data centers to town, but our rates went up. And so you got to, it's not data centers that's driving up the rates. And so if you look at what's driving rates up, and it's pretty simple. It's number one is we're retiring a bunch of our assets that are called baseload assets that are basically paid for. So, and we're trying to replace them with intermittent sources that are more expensive. So in Montana, for example, in the last dozen years, we've retired 900 megawatts of coal power. That's huge. We shut down 2 units of Colstrip and the Corette plant, 900 megawatts. And that's, you shut down 900 megawatts, that's 900 megawatts gone. At the same time, we built about 900 megawatts of wind, but since it's intermittent, it only puts out about maybe 150 or 200. So we lost capacity, and our load stayed the same. So now our price starts to go up. It's just that simple. So, and you're seeing this all over the country is that's what's driving the rates up. There's also policies that drive rates. And then another study that I looked at let's look at electricity rates and the number of data centers. So you plot a histogram of high to low electricity prices, and then you plot behind that how many data centers are there, and there's zero correlation. So largest number of data centers in the country are in Virginia. There's almost 700 of them there, and their electric rates are right in the middle of the pack. Okay. Texas is number 2, and their electric rates are a little bit below the middle of the pack. And then, of course, California's got a lot of data centers, maybe 400, the third highest in the country, and their rates are double what they are in the rest of the country. But it's not data centers; it's energy policy that drives up the rates.
Yeah, policy decisions, they
Mhm.
have consequences. Who would have guessed that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay, so that one other question that I wanted to ask here, you'd mentioned a little bit about what I would affectionately call bring your own power,
correct.
BYOP,
Right.
and this is a trend as someone who's worked in this area, data centers for a number of years. It's been an increasing trend, and you mentioned earlier that it's faster for them to actually just build their own power than it is to go through a long bureaucratic regulatory process.
Correct.
Is that something? It sounds like it's something we'll probably see in Montana, maybe in Broadview.
I think, yeah, you bought Broadview or other places, and so if somebody, but if you look back, and if you look back over the last 70 years at the growth of electricity consumption in the U.S., rapid growth for from about the turn of the century, 100 years ago, to about 1990, and then it flattens out, and then it's been flat for almost over 30 years. And in that, when it flattened out, then we kind of strangulated the process. We made the regulatory process very brittle. So now, as we want to step on the gas again, we can't. And so what's happened is, like here in the state, if Northwestern Energy, who's regulated by the Public Service Commission, if they want to build something, they have to go through their integrated resource plan process, which is a 3-year process of demonstrating the need. And then they need to take that in front of the Public Service Commission and go through public comment. There's another year or two. And then finally they agree, okay, yeah, you can build something. Then they go out to bid. And that end-to-end process is years. It can be, 6 to 10 years. But meanwhile, a data center, they can stand up a data center in 2 or 3 years. But it turns out if they want to build their own generation, they don't have to go through the Public Service Commission. They can build it. Okay. Or they can contract with somebody else and buy the power on what's called a bilateral agreement in Montana, and it completely bypasses the Public Service Commission. So there's another path that they have, and which can speed things up, and the kind of the build your own power. And so there's different options the data centers have. So I know they are looking at bringing their own power and then connecting it to the grid. And so there's a couple different models we have here in Montana.
Yeah, you brought up the PSC, and
Mhm.
I think that it's important to talk about their role. You laid out
Yes,
the role in which they aren't, if they do build your own power, they don't have to go through that process because ratepayers aren't impacted because
correct.
they're not paying for anything, they're not getting anything per se.
That's correct.
So what is the role of the PSC if a data center does want to buy power from, say, Northwestern Energy?
That's a great question, and it's come up into a lot of discussion. So let me back up to the Montana statute. So the legislature works per the rules that's laid out by the Public Service Commission works at the rules that are established by the legislature. And there's some laws that were written over the years, but most recently revised in 2007 when we went from deregulated to regulated. What they basically said was, we're going to allow Northwestern Energy to have a monopoly, but we're not going to allow them to serve what we call large loads. Anything over 5 megawatts, we're not going to allow them to serve because we're worried that the utility is going to subsidize the large loads with residential customers. So that was the intent. It turns out I think that was a mistake in hindsight, but nonetheless, the intent was to insulate the residents. And then they put a law in the book that says any large load that wants to attach to the network needs to go in front of the Public Service Commission and get approval. It's called the choice customer or large loads. And so that there is a statute on the Montana books that does require the data center or the mining or whoever to come to the Public Service Commission to get approval that it will not harm other users. In fact, so this is a unique law that's on the books. Other states are actually trying to adopt it because what it does is it gives you a way to document the contractual agreements between, say, a data center and the utility and ensure that it won't harm the residential customers. So we're actually a little bit ahead of the game there with that rule that's on the books. But it can be a double-edged sword. But anyway, that there is some hooks there and some safeguards, if you will, for the Public Service Commission to use.
We're ahead of the curve is very much something I would agree with. We've got plenty of regulatory tools already on the books to protect ratepayers.
Yeah, we don't need any more. I think we've done a good job there. So
yeah. Now, why is that? Why do you think that we don't need any more? Is it because you think that the benefits of bringing data centers to Montana are just so big that if we go overboard and we kill industry entirely from bringing, or not even data centers, mining, any large user, is that your concern?
That is my concern. So here's my concern is that I know we're going to need significant investments in our power grid, transmission lines, generation facilities, whether they're gas or nuclear or whatever. We also have a natural gas pipeline system that's at capacity, and we need to expand that. And so we're going to have to pay for that. So we either take the 1.2 million of us right now, and we all increase our electricity rates or gas rates to pay for it, or we attract some outside investment in mines, material processing, data centers that can help spread those costs out. And that's a proven model. And if we get too many laws on the books or get too aggressive with large load tariffs or anything like that, we're going to scare these investments away. And then I'll guarantee you our rates will need to go up.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear if we're, a community getting together to pay for a community center and it's let's say 1,000 people in this area were paying for it, and then somebody wants to come in and give a big donation. Well, the amount that I got to fundraise goes down quite a bit. Yeah. So one area that also is very controversial, we've mentioned it already, that's the water use here.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that. They're using water to cool. We've heard things like closed loop. We've heard a lot of different stats, a lot of competing information. Give us the inside scoop. What's happening with data centers and water?
Okay, so you hear, well, data center is going to use 5 million gallons of water a day. Well, there are some out there that do use 5 million gallons of water a day. And what do they use the water for? Well, it's predominantly for cooling and mostly for some evaporative cooling. And but what's happened, and you'll also see some statistics out there of the average water use per data center. I think the number is 1.8 liters of water per kilowatt hour. And you can go run the math. That's a homework assignment for the listeners is to go do that. But that's the average, 1.8. And you can get to a couple million gallons a day if you do that for a big data center. That's the average for all the fleet that's out there now. But the new data centers that are coming online are 1/10 of that. And they've learned some things over the years on how to make the cooling systems more efficient, use less energy in the servers. And so one thing that they need to do is keep the servers at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, they figured out how to design the servers so they can run at 80. Now I need less cooling. Okay, that's good. Then they said, well, we used to run air past these servers and try to pull use air to cool, and air can only move so much energy. They said, well, what if we use liquid cooling inside the data centers? That'll move way more heat, and which takes less energy to run those. And so they started running liquid cooling inside of the data center, and those are closed loops so that liquid doesn't evaporate. And then they've started looking at, okay, now I've got the energy, I can pull the energy out of the server room. Now it's just in the building. How do I get more efficient at pulling the energy out of the building? And there's a number of different design improvements they're making there with air chillers or hybrid systems, or what we call adiabatic, that use less energy. And then one reason that data centers wanted to come to Montana, if your outside air temperature is below 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you don't need any evaporative cooling. So your water use goes to zero. And I just looked at a report here on the average air temperature in Butte is 38 degrees year round. Wow. It's above 80 for a couple months in the summer for a couple hours per, say, July and August, but you can run water free in many parts of Montana for most of the year. And so combine that with the, the liquid cooling and the reduced power consumption and letting the servers run hotter. They're starting to figure this out. So the days of 5 million gallons of water a day in a data center, I wouldn't want one of those coming to Montana, and we don't have to, because they know how to do it for much less.
Yeah, and I think the important thing there is any product or service or anything like that is subject to the surrounding environment, if you will. And
Correct.
so, there's some data centers that I've seen some people cite that's like a lot of water use. Well, they're on the ocean. They're using actually salt
Correct.
water
Yep.
to
Yep.
cool, and
Mhm.
that's why they're positioned there. For Montana, we're not next to the ocean.
No.
We Any facility will not just use up the power. They're subject to the same laws of supply and demand, and the actual laws like water
Mhm.
laws that anyone
Correct.
else would be.
Right. And then the other thing, we get questions about emissions and noise, and those are all legitimate. But we've got, the Montana DEQ and the county zoning and things like that are good safeguards. But with that said, you can go look at data centers, and they're generally quiet. They don't emit much. The waste emissions are usually almost zero. And again, that's all regulated as well. So it's not like I'm saying, give these guys a free pass and carte blanche to do whatever they want. They still have to be environmentally conscious, but they can be. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that I don't think you, I, or anyone else in this conversation saying we want to ruin the environment and use up all our water and then not
no.
have electricity for my heat. I think that what we're saying, though, is there needs to be more realistic discussion that isn't just fear mongering or misleading statistics. That we need to actually sit down and say, hey, there are serious pros here.
Mhm.
We should look at those, and we should evaluate those with the real cons of the situation, as opposed to just kind of clickbaity leads, if you will.
Correct. Yeah, and there's a lot of benefits to the data centers, the tax revenue and the jobs. And we've worked a lot with the Sabi company that's proposing a data center in our area, and they've got a facility out in Quincy, and I wasn't able to go, but a group from Butte went out, and the facility is spotless. There's 5 or 6 data centers in a close proximity, and they've provided. Well, the Quincy just built a new high school for $90 million, and the data center is paid for 60 of it. There's a new subdivision going in across the street. Well, the high school is 150 yards from the data center,
Hmm.
and there's new subdivisions going in across the street. And so, a developer is not going to put a new subdivision in next to a facility that's going to lower his property values. And then the other thing is the data center, Sabi in particular, has invested in a training program at the high school, where the high school students can get certificates in computer science and cybersecurity, and they can come out of school at high school graduates and go across the street to the data center and earn a good living. And so there's a lot of positives that we don't hear about, right? We're too focused on the negatives, but I think there's a lot of positives that far outweigh any of the negatives.
I would certainly agree there. What are some of the things that you have any tips for people? I see, being in this world, I constantly see clickbaity titles and articles about the impact of data centers.
Mhm.
Is there any like rules of thumb or advice you can give to like your everyday person, where quite frankly they're not spending their free time looking at data center policy? They do care about water, they do care about electricity, uh,
Yeah.
but they want to be able to kind of wade through the weeds a little bit. Is this BS, or is this really something to be concerned about? Any
Right.
advice?
Well, what I do a lot of research in this, and so I try to go to reputable places that I can trust, like the U.S. government environmental information or energy information administrations is good. And when I go look at data, I try to confirm it by a couple different sources. I love social media for interactions with friends and family, but it's not a good place to go get information on in either politics or energy, because all bets are off, and it's very misleading. And so I think you just need to be careful of your sources. And I like to share what I do, and if anybody in your audience wants to get a hold of me, I'm happy to share that information. I'm at Montana Tech, and my email address is rmorris4@mtech.edu, and I'm willing to share any of the information that I have, and webinars like this, or with the Montana Chamber of Commerce. And so I think it's just look for a variety of different information sources, and look to cross correlate with sources you trust.
One last question before I let you go here and get back to your
Mhm.
day. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts here. I have my own personal thoughts, but in your mind, like, why is this debate being picked up by certain groups, and they're kind of using some misleading information? Is there a specific thing, or is it a multitude of reasons? Like, why is this becoming the cultural issue, if you will?
Boy, Tanner, I don't think there's one answer. I think there's a variety. I think, and I was a member of the Butte Silver Bow Data Center ad hoc committee, and so I've done a lot of interaction with the public, and I see a lot of different things, and they're all legitimate. And some people just are concerned about water and power, and they don't know. That's one camp. Others are concerned about light or vibration concerns, and those are legitimate. There's some others that are concerned that, hey, artificial intelligence is not good for society, and we don't want it here. And I respect that. There's some concerns about that. But then I think there's just some other people who flatter against anything. And I get a lot of people saying, "Well, I'm not against this, but," and then they rattle off a dozen different reasons why they're against it. And then I think some people just like to have a debate, but I think there's all kinds of answers. I'd be curious to get your thoughts, but I don't think
Yeah.
there's one answer.
I think that's pretty spot on. I do think I'd add a third group there, and being
Mhm.
someone that works on a lot of economic policy too, we find ourselves often asking ourselves this question, whether it's forest management, like, why can't we manage forests like we used to, or why can't we mine like we used to?
Mhm.
And we've got such better technology, we've got healthier standards, but we don't do those things. We can't build like we used to.
Yeah.
And one of those things that I think is that there are some worldviews, and I'd say this is a minority. I think it's a very small minority where there is a worldview what I would consider, I'd call like probably degrowther. Like, they don't necessarily believe that like economic growth or like these kind of opportunities are the way that
Mhm.
we should be going. They kind of have an environmental view, which we all to some extent do. I don't
Yeah.
want any pollution in our water
Correct.
system. I want to be able to go outside and go fishing and hunting
Mhm.
and enjoy Montana. But at the end of the day, if you have a worldview, I think that says that humans are the problem, as
Yeah.
opposed to a potential problem and a solution. Those are
Right.
fundamentally different things. And I
Right.
think where Frontier Institute and where we fall is that, like, we do believe that people are there, that we present some problems, but we also are the solution in a lot of ways too, as opposed to something that we should just reduce overall.
Yeah, correct. And then I have some friends that are in national security, and they're fully, they tell me, Bob, we're in a race with China on AI. And so the Chinese would love nothing better than for us to have an internal debate over data centers, and decide we don't want to do it. And so then they're saying, well, maybe there can be some foreign investment in slowing down data center development in the U.S. And I'm not saying that there's any groups in Montana that are funded by the Chinese, but I know there are some in the United States. And so
Certainly.
again, this is all, there's not one reason. I think there's 100 different reasons. And so what I try to do is just analyze it with my skill set in engineering and economics, and try to provide some data that I believe to be correct.
Well, Bob, I really appreciate your time. We may be doing another one of these as more
All
questions
right.
pop up. I'd love to have you back. You're abundant in information, which I really appreciate.
Well, Tanner, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to join you today.
Thank you. And then there's also, I would be remiss to not mention, you've done a series with the Chamber of Commerce as well online, unpacking this. And so if you're a nerd like me, folks, go out there, watch those videos. They have a ton of graphics where you can actually see the data, and he'll walk you through those. So Bob, thank you so much. Until next time.
Again, thank you.